For today, those of you that have seen the upfront information, I'll just let you know a little bit more about Mike. But Mike Davies from Assessment Portal is joining us. And again, he's in New Zealand today, so hopefully everything goes as planned. Mike Davies has over 25 years experience in the IT industry in various implementation, sales, consulting, and executive management roles in both Australia and New Zealand. Mike is currently the Managing Director of Assessment Portal, developing a platform of automated assessments with a view to enabling IT and the business to effectively know where they are so that the focus is on remediation and improvement. So with that, and if there's any other background that Mike wants to add, I'm going to introduce Mike Davies to you and welcome him from way around the globe. So Mike, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Rick. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I am a fair distance away, but in the modern age, telephony seems to be pretty good, so hopefully we don't have any of the issues Rick alluded to. I won't add any more about myself. I think what's important is the content, not the individual delivering it. So let me just kick in to share with you some of the things that we've discovered. Today I'm going to predominantly focus in on what we call our perception area, so what the business thinks and its alignment to you as IT leaders, because I think today if we just take one step back and have a look at where we are on our ITSM journey, our biggest challenge is still getting to truly connect with the business and have the business truly value and therefore fund what we're trying to achieve. So with that being said, let's just move on very quickly so that you understand what we do, or more importantly, where this data's come from. Why I think I can sit here this morning and say to you, from the work that we've done, here is a reasonable representation of all of you and where you sit as a collective group, or probably sit. What we've built is really a workflow engine. I used to be at BMC. My colleagues have been around ITSM for a long, long time, and we recognize that with many assessments, there was so much work and so much burden on the assessment process that very little was happening at the remediation level. In fact, many people were spending so much money on the assessment, they were exhausted by the time they'd figured out where they were without having actually made progress on where they wanted to get to. So we've built this engine that follows this consistent workflow, which says, let's make sure that we profile to your organization so we know exactly who you are and what you are and where you are. Let's make sure we drive we have our perception survey, and as I mentioned, this is where I'm going to spend most of my time this morning, which is a perceptive view of where the quality of service sits today. We look at the three constituencies of IT leadership, the IT staff, often overlooked, and also the business, the recipients or the business, and get a collective view of where we are strong and where we are weak. And as I said, this is where we're going to talk today. But the key thing there is we should only go and do improvement planning where we understand our quality of service relative to business perception, and we should be absolutely aligned to the key drivers of both business and IT in order to determine which of the processes that we're going to actually remediate. And I didn't say assess deliberately. We should only be focused on assessing what we can actually go and remediate. Additionally, we go through, and I'll touch on a few other areas. I'll touch on our financial modeling component and what some of the things that we've discovered there that relate to your probable chances of success, particularly in getting that remediation program or that transformation program funded by the business. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what people are spending individually, just some of the trends that we've pulled out in relation to getting that business alignment and that commitment. So this is a consistent engine. We've been running it for about 18 months in a .NET platform. We had it in a different platform for about a year before that. And we're running assessments across ITIL, ISO 20K, project management, organizational change, and a number of others. So we have 12 assessments right now, so we're getting a very holistic view of what's going on in IT. Very quickly, and this is key, and I hope this makes sense to everybody, but every assessment we do, other than the profiling assessment, which is just a single person how large are you, where do you reside, are you multi-data center or not. We apply statistical modeling rules to every assessment we send out. And the simplistic way to think about that is any election that's coming up in your geography, for days before that election, they will tell you who is going to win plus or minus 1%. And they've used statistical modeling. In many cases, for an environment or a geography that may have millions of people in it, they'll only actually go and ask the opinion of maybe 1,000 people. So you only need a very small constituency. It's important that you have diversity in that constituency, and you can actually drive a result that's statistically valid. And we do exactly the same thing. So the engine will get you as an assessee to put enough resources into it so that you get enough responses from a beneficiary, an employee, and a management level to ensure that the results we're driving are statistically sound. If we have a statistically sound result across a very broad base of people, we can effectively say it's a fact, or almost a fact. It's certainly good enough for us to say as a true reflection of your position today. So as we step into looking at these trends, I'm coming from the perspective of statistically sound results that we've then averaged across a very broad base of customers and geographies. And just to give you an indication of that, you can see here, because we look at the vertical and we apply different weightings to some of the results based on that vertical, it's across a fairly broad range. Banking and finance and retail is always going to be quite strong from an assessment and a desire to have strong ITSM processes, but also a good level of assessment or participation by government bodies and public sector bodies. So public sector is included in government in that ratio.
And Mike, could I ask a question relevant to this slide? Is how many assessments have you run to compile all this data?
There's a great question. Today there's a little over 100 assessments in this engine to go to these data to create this information. Probably more importantly, there's over 90,000 data points. And when I say a data point to me is an answered question. So across those 100 assessees, we have 90,000 answers to questions on all of the surveys that we do. So quite a deep and rich database of information now that we're starting to poll.
Okay, great, thank you.
So as I said, most of what I'm going to talk about today is from our perception survey. You can see here, this is just a screen capture. These are the results that are the average of all of those assessments. So we ask a whole bunch of questions. Actually, at this level, we ask about 14 questions, and it really is meant to drive us to get a view which of what is the temperature like right now. We don't ask at this level. We're trying to get a true sense of what our business and our staff think about quality of service. So there's nothing ITIL about this. There's nothing ITSM about this. In fact, there's very little IT language in this. The intent here is to say, how focused, let's get a measure, how focused are we on the customer? How much confidence do they have in us? It's the engine's job, it's our job to translate this metric, which is common language or business consumable language, into IT language. So as an example, as a tool, we would look at this and say meeting expectations has a weighting or is important to service level management. But that's the tool's job. It's not the business's job to understand what that means in terms of process. To them, it's all dial tone. So we ask these questions. As I said, it's usually about 14 questions. The results that you're going to see and that we're going to talk about today are the average scores across those 100 plus assessments, all of which returned a statistically sound result. I'm hoping that's making sense to everybody. So let's do something that IT don't do very often. Let's focus on the good news first, rather than the bad news. And there is actually quite a lot of good news at this level. Number one, I think it stands out that the business has confidence in IT to deliver. Too often, and maybe this is getting into Mike's opinion here rather than fact, but I think having done many years of ITSM implementations and working with customers, we struggle with the belief that the business is confident in us. It's a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, but we consistently see that the business is confident in IT to deliver. And the good news is, as a management team and as a service employee, as IT employees, we're not that far behind believing in that as well. So collectively, we have a consensus that we are reasonably confident to deliver to the business. IT management and the business agree that communication is good enough. Now, I say that as good enough because I think in today's economy and what's going on in the world, terms like operational excellence, terms like best practice at a business level can be associated with a cost structure that they're not interested in. And so I often use the term good enough. What is good enough to the business? And I'm looking at these averages, and I'm seeing that our communication levels, and funnily enough, the business and the management believe it's above average, therefore good enough. And it's our staff that are the ones that still think it can be improved. And I think maybe that's a little bit more of a human nature statement than indicating a problem. Lastly, one of the last things that I've pointed out in this good news slide is business understanding is very high. And I think this is something that we should take some credit for, because for many years we've spoken and people have said you've got to work with the business, you've got to understand the business, you've got to speak their language. This is starting to reflect that that's actually that's translating through to some success. IT management still rate this very highly. Staff think they're doing quite well. The business are not quite on the same page as us with that level of confidence, but it's certainly well above average, and it's certainly at a score where we would say you don't need to invest more time on this. You need to continue what you're doing and continue communicating it that you do understand, and hopefully the business will line up. But it's certainly at a level where you wouldn't say, I have to go and do some remediation in this area. And I'll just pose the question, because I'm looking at this, as I look at these things and I go, okay, so we understand the business and we're communicating really well. When I look at some of the other results and we start talking about some of the areas that we could improve, do we know how to advertise success? I think it's an area that I've seen over many years, and I think I still see it when I talk to people when we're working through this assessment process. We are looking for the problems to fix. We're investing money in areas where actually we're good enough, but I'm not sure we're deliberate enough and know how to be deliberate enough to advertise not success at a project level, not success at a component of IT, but actually as a successful delivery of service at a level the business is deeming as good enough. Let's not spend more money here. It's a question, maybe you guys have different views on that. I still feel that we've got work to do there in order to be able to do this, to advertise this in a way that the business understands it's not about one incident that didn't work, it's actually about the service overall. So what are we struggling to accept? Where is our the areas that actually there's a difference between the business and ourselves? We can see here that the business rates us as an important partner. It's a very high score. In fact, it's the highest average across all the scores. So they absolutely see us as a significant partner. There's a significant delta between their rating and the employees and the managers. It's interesting that the employees rate this slightly higher than management do. Not hugely, but it's still a difference. It is a significant difference, as I said, between our view in IT and the business's view. So we have a great level of business understanding. The business has a lot of confidence in us. We feel good about that, and yet we don't actually rate ourselves as an important partner. we're still struggling to feel like we are entitled to that seat at the business table, I suspect. And the other thing I think is that customer focus is actually better than we think. You'd expect your teams and IT employees to rate this quite highly. You'd expect the business to be a little bit harsh on you, on us, because customer focus is the key thing at the end of the day, yet they rate it higher than IT management. So I think here again is an area that we're struggling to accept. Actually, our customer focus is in the realms of good enough. Perhaps it could be a little bit higher, but actually as a score, it's probably in that good enough realm. It's certainly perceived as better by the business than by us. So where does that leave us then? If we've looked at the, what's good, where are the areas we're struggling with? It's the bits that we need to actually do something significant about. And the first one I just wanted to highlight is actually the ratings around staff morale. There is not a substantive delta here, but there is one. As a management or a leadership team in IT, we think our staff morale is higher than they do. It's interesting that the business's perception, the beneficiary's perception, is closer to the actual perception by employees of morale than us as a leadership team. This is one area where I personally think small variances can be very significant. You don't need a lot of delta here between what you think and your true feelings of your staff to actually have a gap that is going to potentially cause you some significant grief in transformation projects, in the adoption of technologies, in the adoption and use of technologies to align to what the business is trying to drive out. But if you've been looking at this screen while I've been chatting, you will have already picked up the number one and the one with the quantum differential in perspective is budget effectiveness. As a IT leadership team, we think our budget effectiveness is quite good, that we're looking after the pennies and therefore spending the dollars well. But the perception of the business and our staff is significantly different and well below the realms of what anyone would think is a good enough understanding. Now personally, again, having been in this area and worked with IT leaders, managers for many years, I actually think we're probably actually doing a very decent job, a good job of managing and having effective budgeting. I think it's more likely that we do a very poor job of translating the true cost of running IT, the way it runs and where that budget's spent in a way that those constituencies understand that we're doing a good job. If truly our budget effectiveness was as poor as this average says, then the business wouldn't fund anything and we'd all be fired or be doing some different jobs, certainly outside of IT. But whether or not they genuinely understand the cost of running the operational part of IT, whether or not we've actually done a good enough job of communicating our successes where we have applied innovation, whether or not we're making the gains or that we should be making, or in fact just advertising those gains appropriately in such a way that those constituencies of people can see and understand that we're spending money in an effective manner. But that is a standout for us. I'm going to touch on a couple of slides. I'm going to touch on a slide around ROI and TCO and understanding some of the financial metrics later on. Simply because this stands out so much, we had to drill into it a bit deeper to see if we could start to identify any areas that we could offer advice to improve. And lastly, I think, I'm not sure that you would measure this as a problem area. It does sit there. Meeting expectations is obviously a very important part of what we're trying to deliver. Most of us are at some point, if I look at core process maturity, incident problem maybe not really changed, getting there. Service level management is one of those processes that's evolving and people have been working on for some time. We're almost there, but not quite. We still have a little bit of improvement to drive in order to get good consensus between those three constituencies, but more importantly, I think, to get the beneficiary's view up above that average mark to a place where they would say, you know what, it's good enough. Today we are communicating well, they have confidence, all those good things, we understand the business, but actually we're still not quite there in terms of meeting their expectations. So what's the car smash for me when I look at this? If I combine the poor perception of budget effectiveness plus that staff morale differential, to me that's a 1 + 1 = 3. I spend lots of time talking to people about assessments, about how they should go about remediation, because remediation or transformation is actually what's important. The assessment's just a component. And it's always about the difficulty of funding investment, particularly in processes that are not quite so visible to the business. So incident management, the help desk, it's visible, people are interacting with it, they see it. Configuration management is not so. And some of those processes that don't have that public visibility continue to be a challenge for people to find, to get A, business understanding, and then B, funding to drive that through. And so the common complaint through these assessment processes is, you know, I can't get enough funding for this. If I look at the fact that fundamentally the business doesn't think you're spending money well, it's the first reason that you're not getting that funding. But I'm going to add to it and say, if in addition to that your teams are not on board, there's actually a bit of a morale issue there. They are not totally bought into what you're trying to achieve with that. It's alignment and it's important to the business. Then that plus the poor budget perception, it means you're probably not going to achieve the results you want. If I define project success as meeting the business objectives and attaining the ROI on time, with the combination of these two things, you are very, very rarely going to get there. You may get a successful implementation, it may get done, it'll probably be a bit late, you'll probably be still considering why your people don't use all the functionality that you've invested in. I think equally too, if we're not prepared to rate ourselves as that important partner, if we're not prepared to step forward and take a proactive stance on our importance where we sit and be able to be very, be able to advocate where we're good enough and delivering to the business at a level that they are telling us is good enough, then we're likely to continue to be far too reactive on incidents as opposed to genuine problems in relation to service management. We're going to continue to respond to the squeaky wheel. So we have to take a step back to look at that picture in order to take 2 steps forward to say, genuinely, these areas we drive, we are successful, we do deliver business value, we're focusing here where you need us to focus.
Hey, Mike, a quick question, just what you just alluded to there. So can you talk more about how you're tying some of these results and these perceptions into, just interesting, into the focus that you may or may not put on problem management? It just was interesting. You just kind of alluded to that. Is there something more there that you're suggesting?
Say that to me again. I'm sorry.
So you alluded to that, you know, with certain, depending on your perception of your service and depending on the perception externally, you alluded to some sort of correlation between the amount of emphasis that the organization may put on problem identification, problem management versus just pure incident management. Is there something more there, or was that just kind of a subtle allusion?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No, I understand your question now. So I think, I mean, I'm actually going to refer now to a paper that's getting a little bit dated now. It's October 2009, but it was a Gartner paper. And one of the things it actually said was, frankly, incident is a commodity. Problem should be by now, but it's not. actually we continue to see that if when we go through our assessment process, one of the outcomes is that we actually rank the processes in order of importance for remediation. So before we've even started to look at how good the process is, or even in fact using ITIL or whatever standard, we actually go business perception, business drivers, IT drivers, rank the processes. Problem management actually comes up in the top 3, certainly in the top 4 most times. Incident management is lucky to make the top 10. In terms of value for remediation. So I made that comment. It really wasn't meant to be any deeper than that, but it does reflect an experience from ourselves, but also supported by Gartner and other people, that it's an area that there are substantive gains still to be made, but we continue to focus a bit more on the front end when actually we should be treating that as a commodity process. And all the
okay, great. Thanks.
And any service desk managers or service process owners that are on the phone have just had a heart attack at what I just said. But there you go. So there was a couple of things that came out of this paper though that I really liked. Other than that, it did state that about incident and problem was that you know, 2 of the biggest inhibitors right now: limited business case knowledge and modest support service maturity gains. So reflecting back on what we've just said, the business and your staff are struggling to see how you're effective with your budgets, and you know, Gartner and others are pulling out that we are struggling actually to put really clever business cases together in order to drive these forward. And we're getting incremental gains in some of these processes and rather than quantum leaps. And in my view, when I look at where processes are ranked in terms of the ability to remediate or their ability to impact by remediation and what we continue to focus on, I can see why we're only having modest gains, because we're continuing down a path of what IT thinks is important to itself to improve, usually based on reactive input from the business, versus truly what can deliver substantive value going forward. So, and just to back that up, so you know, when we look at it, genuinely, I would expect incident management to sit in and around the number 10 as a ranked process for remediation generally, yet it's always assessed. And I'd be really comfortable with that, because I go back, originally I said we need to advertise success. So if you're running an incident management assessment, in order to prove that you've done a great job of it, then I would support you in that. In most cases, I don't believe that's what's going in. I think most people are still, I'm going to do incident problem change config service because that's the order we should do it in, and because I've invested in it, I'm going to assess it. But incident problem, so it is a very consistent flow. It is the typical flow that most people are approaching their ITSM implementation of these processes. So I don't think there's any surprises there in terms of that frequency of assessment. What should be surprising to you is that from an order of importance, incident isn't there. And we often see things like capacity, availability. You talked about release management as next week. Release management often ends up in the top 5. Because we've aligned these processes to business drivers, you get a much different perspective on what's important than the way that we traditionally think about rolling these processes through. Anyway, looking at these results, those are the processes we've assessed, and you know, the percentage of times that we assess it. In most assessments, we try and convince people to limit themselves to about 6 processes, which is why you don't see all the processes listed on this chart. You should, in my view, you should only assess what you're going to remediate. Nobody can remediate every single ITIL process. The only people that should ever be doing an entire assessment of every process is someone who's looking to achieve ISO 20K accreditation. Having said that, and this is my drill in a little bit to the financial modelling we do, and this should surprise a few people, and unfortunately I suspect it won't. But the percentage of processes that they can demonstrate a return on investment. So this is at a detailed level when we're asking process owners about the process they run. So this is about incident management. This is about problem management. It's not about business perception here. It's actually at the process level. Processes with demonstrable ROI, 5%. That is frightening. Processes with an owner is very high. Now that's really good news. We have in those common processes that are being assessed most of the time, we've matured enough to put someone and to make someone accountable for that process. Fantastic. Unfortunately, only about 14% of those process owners knows what it costs to run their process. Now, to me, the slightly worrying thing about that is I'm pulling this data from companies that are doing assessments who want to fund an improvement program. We're funding and we're looking for funding when we don't know what it costs to run it today. So great news, we've associated process owners with key processes. Really frightening news, very few of them actually knows what it costs to run their process today, and even fewer of them know how to demonstrate some form of return on investment today. The ones that we've asked, they're reasonably comfortable with their financial data accuracy. We're in about 55, so it's not overwhelming. But the data is there. It's not that bad. In many cases, it's still very difficult to get, but it's not correlating with the level of knowledge or the level of transparency around what that cost drives or what those ROI drives. We should just be doing a much better job of that. Equally, we still see continuously, even outside of that pure financial aspect, very few processes or process owners have business KPIs associated with the objective they're trying to drive. And I bring that to the fore because those are standout things at a individual process level. When you think about the fact that the number one area that we have to improve on is our financial communication, our budgeting effectiveness. Now, this to me has to indicate that that perception view has a significant level of validity about it, given that we as individual process people can't tell you what it costs to run, what the ROI was, and I can't even correlate it to a business KPI. This is something as a leadership team, as if you're a process owner on this call, this is an area that you have to, this is your one slide. As a process owner, take this, do something about it. You will never get to fix the business's perception of your ability to be trusted with money until you can do this bit well.
And Mike, a quick question on that. So from a practical, any kind of prescriptive guidance kind of next step from what you've seen, any suggestions for folks in terms of what to do with this fairly telling issue?
Well, I'll touch on it a little bit. I think if particularly at a process level, or if you're an IT CIO or an IT leader on this call, you absolutely need to go and sit with your process owners. You have to accept your role in this area, and you need to start work through. Again, it indicates you've got there's someone there to take ownership of this, and that there's a reasonable level of financial data. If you look at it at an entire process level, there's only so much money that you have allocated to ITSM. There's only so many people and so much infrastructure. It's actually not rocket science to get a good enough view of what you basically cost to run. If it's 5 FTEs out of 50, then it's 10% of that salary budget. If it's and you can correlate. Our engine works on a similar model. We take the total cost and drill it down. It's actually not that hard to get a set of numbers that says, here's what it costs me to run, and here's my ROI. Getting to that point where you start to drive into business-aligned KPIs, that is a next step that requires a level of maturity, but you can't even have that conversation until at least you know what it costs and what your return from a financial perspective is. So where to from here? Go and learn the business financial language. You know, it's easy to say, and I think we've probably, many people on the call will say, yeah, we've been doing that for years, and we build business cases based on a template that's at a business template, not an I template. But we're still a long way from being in a position where we're talking in a way that they understand the value and the business deliverable associated with that. Here's an example. I think this was, I've only heard of this once. It was somebody I know and have known for a few years. He went to the CFO and didn't ask for money for an ITSM project. He asked to borrow the first phase of a 4-phase project. So he treated the CFO like a bank manager. He said, well, I've got this project, it's 4 discrete phases. I'm going to borrow the money for phase 1. I'm seeking to borrow the money for phase 1. Out of my savings, I'm going to prove that I've achieved that. Out of the savings, I'm going to fund phase 2 and pay you back 25% of the original investment, i.e. you can take that much out of my budget. And after 4 phases, he was able to go back to the CFO and say, I proved it every step of the way. I funded it myself, and my return on investment, my initial return on investment at the point to go live was that you had the money I borrowed back. Now, when he presented this to the CFO, and it's a reasonably large American company actually, the CFO said to him, an IT person has never spoken to me this way. I'm going to approve this funding to see if it works. So I don't know, I'm not suggesting that's a great example, I'm not suggesting that's what you should do tomorrow, but it is a translation of the way we talk for something that fundamentally the business still considers dial tone in order to drive the level of funding, but also the level of understanding of success, return on investment, and therefore at the end of the day, fundamentally, a trust in the way that you're running the financial aspect of your business.
And Mike, what levels of management do you suggest get good at talking that kind of language?
Anyone that owns a budget.
Right.
At the end of the day, anyone that owns a budget. We saw in the previous chart, process owners should have business-related KPIs. So they'll own some form of budget. They don't know what it costs to run it today, and they don't have business KPIs. So anyone that owns a budget has to have some level of business understanding. As an IT leadership team, it's absolutely imperative that not only we do that, but in fact that we become part of a pivotal role of translating it to those budget owners. If you're a very large company, you know, the process owner might be, I don't know, 3 levels of management away from the CIO. Therefore, his level of her ability to have a direct line with the business is quite long. We need to take accountability and responsibility for that translation.
Right. And where do you think that training should come from, or that education should come from? Because like you mentioned here, you did say that we've heard that before. You know, you have to speak the language of the business, but like we always talk about, what's the prescriptive component there, right? Who and how do you improve that in your organization?
Well, I think, and this couples with my next point here, there is a lot of goodness in what we're doing today. You know, in most companies, IT has been doing more for less for the last, certainly before Y2K, for the last 10, 12, 15 years. We've been continuing to deliver, irrespective of perception, but deliver by doing more for less in a business dynamic that continues to grow. There's a heck of a lot that actually is being done and being done well. I would be a big advocate for the first step on that journey to getting getting at the table at a business level is to be very deliberate and compelling about where you're successful. We are not going to spend money in these areas because you have said we are doing this well and we're doing this to a level of expectation. The dial tone is good. And if you can start to get deliberate and compelling about where you deliver great service, you will start to drive into conversations with your leadership team at an organizational level about where they see that there can be improvement, but also gaining their respect at not just a financial level, but at a communication level, because you are stepping forward. I think too often we're stepping backwards to try and fix stuff rather than stepping forward to say, actually, you know what, we've earned a right for this conversation. We've earned the right to not be beaten up in these areas, and therefore now help me to understand what I need to know next. Now, I know that's a long answer to your question, but there is no easy solution here. This is not go off and do a business course and you'll be right. In most cases, it's getting very deliberate and getting very close to your individual business and the drivers that are driving them, and therefore what's actually important for them to see you improve or remediate, but for them to also understand what you do well enough.
Okay, excellent.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very good. Yes.
But as I say, you know what, there's a couple of things in life where fundamentally there's no silver bullet. There is no silver bullet here. This is hard work. Most of us are technology people. Most of us can, you know, do some pretty incredible things if we get locked in the data center in the middle of the night. But we have to make that transition through to the point where the people at the boardroom table are trusting us with that money. And it's hard yards. You've got to be very deliberate about it. Otherwise, it's going to be a long time coming. And, you know, a year from now, I'll present a slide that says we still don't know how much it costs to run our processes and therefore our entire ITSM infrastructure.
Okay.
And then, and as I say, I keep saying this: define good enough, and only target this for a level of remediation, unless, you know, in some instances, a large corporate bank, excellence actually equals good enough. But in many companies, you know, nobody wants to hear the term ITIL, it's dial tone. They expect it. Nobody wants to hear that I'm funding operational excellence, best practice. These are all great terms for you to use internally. Actually, start thinking about terms like good enough. What is it that you need? Where do we need to get to that you will be satisfied? That now becomes excellent, not an ITIL maturity score, not some other esoteric metric. What is it that's good enough? If I understand what's good enough and I get there, you leave me alone, right? We're good. That plain English is part of that translation, but it's getting away from some of these terms that I think we've been using for years, but they have connotations of unattainability to them for both the business and for our staff. So where does that leave me to make a few kind of conclusive things? It's interesting to me that we still really haven't, if you add all this up and you have a think about it, we still really haven't got the strategy bit right. So ITIL 3, when we released ITIL 3, we included this life cycle. It starts or has a key component, which is the strategy bit. I still think we're building strategy at a process level, but we're not doing it at a business level. We're certainly not looking at it from a IT strategic value that the business will in turn support. So I think we need to start thinking a bit more about that at strategic level. We need to drive back in and look at TCO and ROI, not just TCO. TCO is what IT use to fund projects out of OPEX. Now that's a generalization, but total cost of ownership, I'm going to drive down cost. Great, more for less. You know, your people are already sick of hearing this. You've got a morale issue. Let's get away from that. Let's look at return on investment. I personally think you need to balance both. You are not going to get a lot of investment in a lot of areas for ITSM, particularly when fundamentally it's perceived to be there at some level, if you're not also showing that you're reducing some TCO. But if you incorporate ROI into it in a way that your staff fundamentally understands the value it's delivering the business and buys into those goals, then you actually have a chance of getting there. And lastly, invest in your people some more. Change, a good platform for change is critical. It's the people that make the difference. If you're not putting the appropriate investment into the people aspect of your ITSM transformation projects, they will never succeed. Again, I define success as achieving a business valued ROI on time. You will never hit that with your people currently thinking you're just continuing to push more for less, and there's a discrepancy between their view of their morale and association with that program and yours. So in this wonderful world where we've invested for years in technology, switch it around, put your people first, put the process second, evolve the use of your tools to support those, but do it in a way that's actually driven by business drivers targeting a realistic or good enough objective, and we'll get out of these incremental maturity gains and start to achieve some quantum leaps. And that's all I have to say about that.
Excellent, excellent. I think the call from New Zealand over here and back and forth, I think, went well. So very good. I don't think there was any issues with the audio. So that was excellent, Mike. And we do have we've got an opportunity here to post questions again for Mike. If you want to use your question box in your GoToMeeting panel, so please feel free to do it. I also wanted to thank everyone for joining us again this week. And prior to taking a look if there's any other questions, I just wanted to reiterate that next Tuesday, same time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll have Graham Furness back again with a new topic on release and change, the whole concept of them being related but not the same. So those of you that were here at the beginning, you saw the rundown. If you want to go on to ThoughtRock or stay tuned to your email, there'll be more information on Graham's session next week. But again, please come back and join us or pass it along to a colleague where release and change seems to be relevant for where they're at in the cycle today. That would be fantastic. And as you know, Graham always comes to us with some fantastic learning content that you've got great takeaways from his sessions. So any other questions for Mike, please post them now. I know we went through that. It's fantastic content, Mike, and I think this is your first time doing ThoughtRock. Is that correct?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, hopefully we can have you back again, and we do appreciate you again calling in and doing this and putting the time into the ThoughtRock community. Again, for anybody that wants to reach out to Mike directly, Mike, do you have? I'm not sure if we have your contact information on any of those slides back further, but you can reach out to Mike directly. Mike, if there's any slides that you have with your content or with the contact information, or let people know how to get in touch with you, that'd be great.
You bet. I tell you what, I'll before we ship this deck out, we'll put my email address on the front bit, but it's just mike.davies@assessment-portal.com.
Yeah, we can include that. You're right. We can include that contact information in ThoughtRock. And for those of you
I know from the some of the when people were registering, there was a few comments that kind of related more to how the assessment works in some more detail at that level. I didn't want this to be a tool pitch, but if people do want to understand a little bit more about the assessment itself, then just reach out to me and we'll one-on-one it.
Absolutely, and we encourage you to do so. So that's fantastic. And as Lisa mentioned right off the top, this presentation has been recorded and will be made available to the participants, as well as it'll be made available to everyone in the ThoughtRock community. So more information is available in there. If for whatever reason you have forgotten Mike's contact information, it's on the screen. You can go through us at info@thoughtrock.net, and we'll make sure that any of the questions or follow-up requirements will go directly to Mike. So again, Mike, I appreciate it. Thanks again for sticking within the time, and thanks everyone for joining us. Please, we'll see you back next week or any of the subsequent sessions. Again, I do encourage you to use the idea share inside of ThoughtRock to suggest content experts, sessions that you would suggest, different learning elements. We'll continue to work hard to get those loaded up into ThoughtRock. So thank you everyone again. Thank you again, Mike, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.